reporters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. I am Estefania Bravo, and this is From the South. The International Monetary Fund has said that it plans to wrap up talks to strengthen a $50 billion financing deal with Argentina, quote, as rapidly as possible. The announcement came Thursday as the country's peso and stocks climbed for a second straight day. Late on Wednesday, Economy Minister Nicolás Turchov said he had enormous confidence that Argentina would be able to reach an agreement with the IMF on early disbursements from the $50 billion standby loan, which was approved in June before the peso suffered a sharp depreciation in the first week of September.
Thank you. Good to see you too. It's very good to see you.
A protest has taken place in Buenos Aires against President Mauricio Macri's austerity measures. Our correspondent Edgardo Esteban has more.
A
protest took place in the capital city of Buenos Aires by various social movements due to the difficulties they are facing because of the lack of subsidies for social kitchens. They are also demanding their pensions that have been delayed. There was a very strong police operation here that caused tensions between the protesters and the police forces. Another topic that is also worrying is the small and medium-sized enterprises. Some 8,000 have closed down and 5,000 workers have been laid off. These companies are not able to sell their products due to the increase of the dollar and the crisis. This is creating alarm across the country that could increase in the next couple of days.
Thank you, Edgardo, for your report. And the minimum wage of $418 a month has been approved in Chile, but it doesn't come close to corresponding with the high cost of living there. And now questions are being asked about the government's support for the free market model in light of the Argentinian economic crisis.
Chile is a country where many people have had a hard time to pay for fundamental services like health, education, housing, and water. Now, after weeks of discussion, the Chilean parliament has approved the minimum wage.
I work with bitterness for this minimum wage, hoping for future national projects where the government remembers that there is an organized social basis and that the promise of discussing these poverty amounts that we approve today must be fulfilled.
$418 for working a whole month. What can you afford with that in Chile?
I think we can't afford anything with this. It's very little for a person to try and live on. Minimum salaries must be over $580. It must at least cover minimum expenses like food, rent, and studies.
In the midst of this, it feels like the economic crisis in Argentina is creeping across the border. Argentina is Chile's sixth largest commercial partner worldwide. Where will the intentions of Mauricio Macri and Sebastián Piñera end, who in April of this year signed a series of agreements to promote commercial liberalization and an agenda of development? Economic experts warn of a reduction in exports, low tourism, and difficulty in achieving international agreements on a social level.
I
think it will be the middle class who will get hit the hardest.
I think the middle class and the most vulnerable, which are the working class.
A scenario muddying the waters further is the allegation against the president for having received privileged information in the purchase actions of LAM Airlines in 2006, current LATAM. Today, the former president of Banchile says he has secret recordings that confirm it.
Those audio recordings exist, I have them, but the recordings have never been heard by anyone, and they won't be heard by anyone. A lot of people have talked about this, and I want to clarify it because it is important for the privacy of the people involved and the company that I represented.
In 2016, Sebastián Piñera was also tied to bribes that allowed LAN Argentina to begin commercial activities in Chile. These governments clearly shared the same vision and model of development. And now, only time will tell if they're also destined to share an economic crisis.
And Brazil's Supreme Court has rejected the latest appeal by the legal team of former President Luis Inacio Lula da Silva. This essentially means that Lula is out of the presidential race. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Lemus, has more.
People in Brazil are still reeling from the surprise decision by Supreme Federal Court Justice Edson Fachin to turn down the appeal of Lula's defense team. Lula's lawyers had asked that the court adhere to a recent UN resolution saying the jailed former president should be allowed to participate in the presidential race. Fachin's stance is particularly surprising since last Friday he warned the Supreme Electoral Court that the UN's resolution should be taken into account. But he has now obviously gone back on his words. This decision by Judge Fachin and the recent verdict from the Supreme Electoral Court, which said Lula is ineligible to participate in the elections, leaves the left-wing leader completely out of the presidential race. These decisions have come despite popular support for Lula and the fact that he still leads in all polls by a wide margin. Social movements are planning various mobilizations in support of the former president and to reject these decisions.
That was Nacho Lemus from Sao Paulo, and Brazilian right-wing presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro has been stabbed. It happened during a crowded campaign rally in Minas Gerais. The wound was superficial and he is recovering in a hospital. The assailant has been detained by the police. The National University academics from Rio are calling for the government to fund the restoration of the National Museum following a devastating fire. Our correspondent in Brazil, Andre Vieira, has more.
We're still here with the Brazilian resistance in defense of the National Museum that caught on fire on Sunday. We are here in this plenary organized by the academic community from the Rio de Janeiro University to let people know that the government is directly responsible for the fire through reducing public funds, not only for culture, but also for education and health, because of the constitutional amendment that has frozen public spending for the next 20 years. Now the academic community is demanding that the government send the necessary money to rebuild the museum and to preserve it, because it is the oldest in the country and one of the most important in the world.
Thank you, Andre, for your report. And 92 Venezuelan migrants who asked to be repatriated from Ecuador have landed in Caracas. They returned in a government-chartered plane as part of their return to the homeland program. Their families were eagerly awaiting them at the Simón Bolívar International Airport. The migrants shared some of the hardships they faced after migrating and talked about their will to push forward back at home.
In Ecuador, they are afraid of us. You could just tell. We were pushed to the side. Finding work was very difficult. And when we did, we were exploited. We were paid much less than the minimum wage. I couldn't stay there. I wanted to come back home.
And Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza took to Twitter to welcome the Venezuelan migrants back home. On Twitter, he said, quote, "Welcome compatriots from Ecuador. You are back to the country with your families and hope." He also confirmed the government of Venezuela will continue to help migrants get back to Venezuela and help those who want to fight for their country. Nicaraguans have condemned the United States for calling the country a regional threat. The U.S. made the comment at the United Nations Security Council meeting to discuss the civil unrest in the country. The Nicaraguan government has strongly rejected the comment and also ordered the expulsion of the United Nations Human Rights Delegation from the country. Thousands of Nicaraguans marched in the capital of Managua to show their support for President Daniel Ortega.
We say to the U.S. government, we say to the U.S. congressmen, we say to them that if they want to contribute to the peace in Nicaragua, they must respect Nicaragua as a sovereign nation. The best thing they can do and should do is to not mess with Nicaragua, to respect Nicaragua.
And Cuba's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs has also reacted to the comments.
As the first act of its September presidential period ahead of the Security Council, the United States imposed the inclusion of a topic regarding Nicaragua. They manipulated the proceedings and violated the UN's agreements in order to do this. With disrespectful and interventionist statements, the permanent representative of the United States made a call to take actions against Nicaragua and to maintain the dirty war policy against Venezuela, also violating every international rule while it insulted Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega.
The UN Security Council, Russia, and China on Wednesday demanded that the U.S. respect the sovereignty of Nicaragua. They stated that the country is not a threat to international peace and that therefore the issue of Nicaragua should not be submitted to a discussion of any kind. They demanded respect for the nation's self-determination. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives. Saturdays, only on LSU.
Welcome back. It's been 1 year since one of the most powerful hurricanes on record, Hurricane Irma, devastated countries in the Caribbean. September 6, 2017, the Category 5 hurricane made landfall on Antigua and Barbuda. Antiguans thought they'd been spared. That is, until the sun rose and the devastation to Barbuda became visible. The name Irma has since been retired from the hurricane database. Such was its devastation. The island of Barbuda was completely evacuated, and since then the country has held an election, and tensions between Barbudans and Prime Minister Gaston Brown have risen. And just as Barbuda continues to recover, tensions between the central government and Barbuda remain. The government says Barbudans who were transported to Antigua haven't returned home to help with the recovery effort.
What I would have loved to see, though, is more participation from our Barbudan brothers and sisters into rebuilding Barbuda. I would have, instead of a situation of trying to sensationalize these issues in the public domain, that there would be some commitment and focus on returning to Barbuda to rebuild Barbuda and to make it better than what it was before.
St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands was also devastated by Hurricane Irma. The storm pounded St. Thomas and St. John for hours, wreaking havoc on all corners. Roofs were blown off, buildings completely destroyed, homes flooded, and a number of residents lost their lives. 1 year later, a lot of progress has been made. Power is 100% restored. The federal government has poured billions of dollars into the local economy. Schools, for the first time since the storms, open on Tuesday as normal. And Canada is providing nearly $20 million to fund development projects in Dominica. Ottawa is providing $7 million to the Caribbean Development Bank. Dominica will be able to access the funds for the Dominica Disaster Recovery Resilience Project. Canada will help to install an emergency radio network and train 30 community response and disaster management staff to operate and maintain it. Dominica was devastated by Hurricane Maria on September 19th of last year.
I know how strong. We have listened to the needs expressed by the Caribbean governments. We're also working with local stakeholders and regional institutions to help recovery happen and to help you build even better.
Canada is not here to ask us for anything. They're here to offer us assistance, to give us the support in a tangible, practical, and sincere manner. And it is left for us as citizens of Dominica to be united around this vision and to work tirelessly to achieving it for the welfare and well-being of future generations.
And the dispute between the Guyana Teachers Union and the government will go to arbitration. The union has said they were willing to accept a 15% wage increase down from the original 40% they had requested. But after a 2-hour meeting at the Department of Labor, it was decided that the dispute will go into arbitration. This means that the teachers will return to classrooms in full on Monday. And a meeting between the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and the unions has concluded, but no agreement has been reached. The strike called for Friday to protest the closure of the Petro-Trin refinery is still on, but the government says it hopes that good sense will prevail. Among the decisions coming out of the meeting is that a date has been decided for the decommissioning of the Petro-Trin refinery. It will cease operations in December. The union leader says they went into the meeting with the hope of holding honest discussions with the government. However, he says their plans were not taken into consideration. The Guatemalan President Jimmy Morales has ratified his decision to prohibit the entrance of Iván Velázquez, the head of the International Commission Against Impunity in the country. Morales also reasserted that the mandate of the CICIG mission will not be renewed. He also affirmed that it is the duty of all Guatemalan citizens to recognize the supremacy of the Constitution.
Lamentamos públicamente.
We publicly regret the apathy of the United Nations to resolve these types of situations, which have been clearly set out in Article 12 relating to the establishment of an international commission against impunity in Guatemala. This decision is within the power of the Guatemalan government, nor is it violent or does it break the order of the national constitution.
And Ecuadorian President Lenín Moreno is on an official week tour long to Japan to strengthen both countries' political, diplomatic, and trade relationships. Ecuador and Japan have signed a $70 million financial agreement. The visit is part of the celebration of the centenary of Ecuador and Japan's diplomatic relationship. Thousands of students in Mexico have demonstrated against violence after a series of brutal attacks by vigilant groups at the National University.
Students, thousands of them, marching in solidarity with their fellows at the Science and Humanities College, or CCH. They've been attacked by a vigilante group, or porros as they're known in Mexico. The young people blame the college authorities, especially the rector, Enrique Graue.
One group of students was practically kidnapped. A veterinary student was murdered. A high school girl was even killed here. There were robberies at the university. Teachers have been killed. Students have been murdered. There have been shootings right here. We are sick of this.
The response of the rector, who was watching President Peña Nieto's State of the Union address at the time of the attack, has angered even more the student representatives in nearly all the faculties.
We need structural changes that ensure our safety, so that the ones who hired the porros and the porros themselves are brought to justice. And well, we are all here. All the community who Graue said will never protest are here demanding our rights.
This protest was held on the eve of the anniversary of Mexico's most notorious student massacre at Tlatelolco Square in 1968.
Let the university authorities see that we are strong, that we students are capable, and that we haven't forgotten the 43, nor the 68, nor all the history in between.
The young students presented their demands right outside the rector's office. The 44 student councils agreed to meet once the 48-hour strike is over to decide what action the student movement will take next.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
Infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice. The American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deep into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. An 8.1 magnitude earthquake has struck the coast of Fiji. No tsunami alerts have been issued. According to the National Weather Service in Hawaii, the tremor occurred too deep within the earth to trigger a tsunami. And India's top court has scrapped a colonial-era ban on gay sex in a landmark ruling. It's being considered as a breakthrough in a socially conservative country where homosexuality has been a taboo. Gay sex had been punishable with a sentence of up to 10 years. Activists and the LGBT community celebrated the news and hope that India continues to work towards equality. And thousands of white South African workers have marched in protest of a share scheme offered only to black staff. Around 5,000 members of the mostly white trade union Solidarity staged a strike at a Sasol fuel plant in Secunda, South Africa. The company has sold 25% of its shares to exclusively black workers in line with a requirement to atone for decades of discrimination under apartheid.
Where workers are actually working good and the relationships are good, and suddenly you come here with a system and you say, listen workers, you are divided on grounds of race. Then it goes too far. And the question is, when does affirmative action and empowerment goes too far? There must be parameters.
And a Yemeni rebel group has refused to attend United Nations-led peace talks in Geneva. The Houthi rebel delegation said it won't attend the peace talks on Yemen until the UN complies with their 3 conditions. Their demands are to transport wounded rebels to Oman and also take them back home after receiving treatment. And finally, guarantee their delegation can safely return to Sana'a, the capital held by them after the talks. And now it's time to bring you more stories making headlines from around the world.
Close to 200 migrants were rescued from a ship trying to reach Spain. 5 migrants died on board. A further 4 people were lost at the sea. The ship docked in the port of Motril in southern Andalusia. Dozens of people aboard were then seen disembarking wearing hooded white forensic suits. 10 soldiers have been sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for the rape of foreign aid workers and the murder of a journalist in South Sudan. The attack occurred during the civil war in 2016. Armed men raided the Terrain Hotel and carried out an onslaught lasting several hours. A military court passed the sentence and ordered the government to pay compensation to the victims.
Verdict number 1. The government of the Republic of South Sudan will pay, represented in the Ministry of Defense and Veteran Affairs, an amount of $2,258,590.48 to the compliant Mr. Mike Woodward. This is a total compensation for the damages that had been caused to the hotel, which is owned by him, as a result of the destruction, damage, looting, and theft of the properties and the belongings of the inmates and the agents of the case.
A mass protest has taken place outside the Ukrainian parliament in Kiev to demand electoral reform. The demonstration was joined by members of various political parties. They all argue that the law needs to be reformed and are in favor of introducing a proportional system.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. As always, these and other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.